Listen carefully, because this is not just any story. This is the story of a woman who was broken by the world, and then became someone the world could never forget. Her name was Ada. On a dusty Tuesday morning, the people of Humira village dragged her into the center square like she was a sack of old rags. Men who had borrowed money from her. Women whose children she had taught to read. They shoved her forward and pointed their fingers and shouted things that made the air feel thick and ugly. "Thief!" someone cried. "Witch!" cried another. Ada did not fight back. She stood with her head low and her hands clasped together, and she took every word like a stone thrown against her chest. She did not understand what she had done wrong. She still did not understand when they tied a rope of shame around her wrists. The village had raised his hand for silence. "This woman has brought disgrace upon us," he announced. "And today she will answer for it." The crowd pressed in closer. Ada closed her eyes. Then, from the far end of the road, a sound came. A deep rumbling. Then dust. Then the glint of black metal catching the morning sun. 3 long black cars rolled into the village square and stopped. The crowd stepped back. The middle car door opened slowly. A tall man stepped out. He wore a dark suit that cost more than everything in Humira combined. He looked at the crowd. Then his eyes found Ada. And he stopped breathing. Why did he know her face? But let us go back. Because a tree does not fall in a single day. 3 weeks before that morning in the square, Ada's life was the kind that made other people look away. She lived in a single room at the edge of the village with a cracked window and a roof that cried when it rained. She owned 2 dresses, 1 pair of shoes with a broken strap she had tied together with a strip of old cloth, and a box of school chalk. Every morning before the sun finished rising, she walked 40 minutes to the small government school where she taught 42 children who sat on the floor because there were not enough benches. She gave them everything she had: stories, songs, the alphabet, hope. But the villagers did not see any of that. To them, Ada was the woman with no husband, no family, no future. Her uncle, Chief Bello, the man who was supposed to be her guardian, treated her like a servant. He took whatever small salary she earned and left her just enough to eat once a day. "You are lucky I let you sleep under my family's name," he told her often. What nobody knew, what nobody bothered to find out, was that Ada sent a small portion of her money every month to a post office in a town far away. For whom? That was a secret Ada carried alone, pressed tight against her heart like a folded letter. The trouble with being kind is that some people mistake it for weakness. 2 weeks before her public shaming, Ada had done what she always did. Old Mama Ngozi, the woman who sold groundnuts at the market entrance, had fallen sick with a fever that knocked her flat for 5 days. Ada cooked for her. She carried water. She sat beside her at night and fanned her when the heat got bad. When Mama Ngozi recovered, she stood up, dusted herself off, and walked back to her groundnut stand without a word of thanks. Ada did not ask for any. That was simply not how she was made. But something else happened. Whispers started in the market that week. Small, poisonous things that floated from mouth to mouth like smoke. That Ada had been inside Mama Ngozi's house for 5 days. That Mama Ngozi's brass jewelry box had gone missing. That nobody had seen inside Ada's room in months. Ada heard the whispers the way you hear rain before it reaches you, faint, then louder, then impossible to escape. She went to Mama Ngozi directly. "Sister, you know I took nothing from you." Mama Ngozi looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned away. "People are saying what they are saying," she replied quietly. Ada walked home slowly. That evening, she told herself it would pass. Lies always burned out like small fires, she thought. She was wrong. Someone was feeding those flames. But who? It was a Thursday evening when Ada found the stranger. She was walking back from school along the path that wound past the old quarry, a rough, forgotten stretch of land where nobody went after dark. She was tired. Her feet ached. She was thinking about her one remaining piece of bread and whether to eat it that night or save it for morning. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she almost stepped past it. A groan. Low and wet and desperate. She stopped. She looked down the slope toward the quarry ditch. There, half hidden by tall grass and the shadow of a broken wall, was a man. He was lying face down, dressed in expensive clothes that were now ripped and soaked dark with blood. He was big, broad-shouldered and tall. But right now he looked small the way all people look small when their body is giving up. Ada looked behind her. The road was empty. She looked toward the village. Not a soul. She scrambled down the slope. She knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. A pulse. Thin as a thread, but alive. "Sir?" she whispered. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered. His cracked lips parted. And then, barely above the sound of the wind in the grass, he said one word. Her name. Ada. She froze. Her whole body went cold. This stranger, this bleeding, broken man she had never seen before in her life, had just spoken her name. How? Ada did not run. That was the first thing people never understood about her. She did not run from things that frightened her. She got her arms under his shoulders and pulled. He was heavy. Her back screamed. Her sandal strap snapped completely off her foot. She pulled anyway, slowly, inch by inch, dragging him up the slope and onto the narrow path. She could not carry him to the village. The village was already talking. If they saw her arrive at night, with a bleeding man nobody recognized, the whispers would become a wildfire. She brought him instead to the small storage room behind the school, a forgotten space full of old books and broken desks. She laid him on the cleanest surface she could find, a flattened cardboard and an old curtain. She cleaned his wounds with water and the hem of her dress. She used her school chalk bag as a pillow for his head. As she worked, she noticed something. Around his wrist, beneath the torn sleeve of his shirt, was a small metal band. It was plain and simple, but it carried an engraved mark, a symbol she had never seen before. It looked like a scale, balanced and precise, with a single flame at its center. She did not know what it meant. But something in her stomach told her this man was not ordinary. Outside, she heard footsteps on the road. Then voices. Men with torches. They were searching for something. Or someone. Ada blew out her small candle and pressed herself against the wall. Through the gap in the storage room door, she watched 3 men move slowly along the road. They carried torches and one of them had a radio that crackled and hissed. They passed without stopping. She breathed again. For 3 days she kept the stranger hidden. She brought him water from the school well before dawn. She found leftover rice from the children's feeding program and fed him spoonful by spoonful as his fever raged. She changed the cloth on his wounds. She sat with him through the long nights and watched him fight something inside his own body. On the 3rd day, his eyes opened properly for the first time. He looked at the cracked ceiling. He looked at the broken desks. He looked at Ada. "You stay," he said. His voice was deep, rough from days of silence. "You needed help," she replied, as if that answered everything. He tried to sit up and winced hard. She put a hand on his chest. "Not yet." He looked at her for a long moment, studying her face with eyes that saw too much. "My name is Daniel," he said finally. "I cannot tell you more than that right now. But I need you to understand, by helping me, you have put yourself in danger." Ada folded her hands in her lap calmly. "Then it is a good thing I am used to danger," she said. Daniel looked at her again. Then, for the first time, he almost smiled. "What kind of trouble is coming?" she asked. He turned his face away and said nothing. On the 4th night, Ada came to the storage room and found it empty. The curtain was folded neatly in the corner. The cloth she had used to clean his wounds was rinsed and draped over the windowsill to dry. The broken desk he had leaned against was pushed back to its original place. He was gone. No word. No note. Nothing. Ada stood in the empty room for a long time. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily, but something in her chest felt like a door slamming shut. She had saved his life. She had risked everything. And he had simply disappeared like smoke. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself wrong. The next morning, she found Chief Bello, her uncle, waiting outside her room before sunrise. His arms were crossed and his expression was the kind that came just before something bad happened. "I know what you have been doing," he said. Ada kept her face still. "I have been teaching school. Do not be clever with me," he snapped. "Someone saw you going to the back of that school at night. And now soldiers have been in this village asking questions." "Soldiers, Ada?" He stepped closer. "If you have brought trouble to this family, I will deal with you myself. Do you understand me?" Ada looked him in the eye. She said nothing. That afternoon, she went to school and taught her children how to spell the word courage. But that night she heard knocking on her door. Then shouting. Then boots. They did not knock long before they broke it open. 4 soldiers in green uniforms pushed into Ada's small room and turned everything upside down. They flipped her mattress. They opened her box of chalk and scattered it across the floor. They pulled her 2 dresses off the nail on the wall and checked the pockets. They found nothing. Because there was nothing to find. Chief Bello stood in the doorway watching with the look of a man who had already decided the verdict before the trial. "She was harboring a fugitive," he told the soldier in charge. "This woman brought a criminal into our community." The soldier looked at Ada. "Is this true?" "I helped an injured man," Ada said. "I did not ask his name or his crimes. I only saw that he was bleeding and would die without help." The soldier's face gave nothing away. He turned to Chief Bello and spoke quietly. Then he turned back to Ada. "You will come with us to the station for questioning." The villagers had gathered at the broken doorway by then. Ada could see their faces, curious, satisfied, some of them almost pleased. These were people she had taught and fed and prayed over. Now they watched her being led out of her own home like she was the criminal. What none of them noticed was a black car parked at the far end of the road. And the man sitting inside it, watching everything through tinted glass with very still, very careful eyes. The village square became a courtroom the following morning. Chief Bello had moved fast, faster than Ada had ever seen him move for anything good. He had gathered the village elders and the market women and the idle men who had nothing better to do, and he had built a stage of shame right in the open air. Ada stood at the center of it. Her wrists were not bound, but it felt the same. Words hit her from every direction. Kidnapper. Spy. Which who used men for dark purposes. Every lie was louder than the one before it. The village head sat under the shade tree with his walking stick across his knees. "We will decide her punishment today," he announced, and the crowd murmured with the sound of people who had already decided. Ada looked at the ground. She thought about her children in school, who would be waiting for her. She thought about the man Daniel, who had left without a word. She thought about the small monthly envelope she sent to the post office in a faraway town. Then she heard it. The deep, low rumble of engines. The crowd heard it too. Heads turned. The rumble grew closer, and the sound of it pressed the noise of the square into silence. 3 black cars rolled in and stopped. Doors opened on both sides and men in suits stepped out and formed a line. Their shoes were polished. Their jackets were pressed. Their faces were the kind that did not ask for permission. Then the middle door opened last. And Daniel stepped out. The village square went completely still. He did not rush. He walked across the square with the kind of slowness that only belongs to people who know that everything will wait for them. He looked different from the bleeding, broken man Ada had dragged out of a ditch. He was clean-shaved now. He wore a dark gray suit with a single white pocket square. His shoes caught the sun. And his face, calm, still, sharp, was a face that had made decisions that changed people's lives. He stopped in front of the village head. He did not greet him the way visitors greeted elders. He simply looked at him. "Release her," he said. 2 words, quiet as a river, deep as a well. The village head stood up. "Sir, I don't know who you—" "My name is Daniel Okafor," the man said, and he said it the way you speak a word that closes every other conversation. Something shifted in the crowd. A ripple. Then a wave. One elder leaned over and whispered to another. Then the whisper spread and the color drained from Chief Bellow's face like water leaving a cracked pot. Slowly, one by one, knees began to bend. The men in suits had not asked anyone to kneel. Nobody had been told to. But bodies know power the way grass knows rain, instinctively, without instruction. Daniel Okafor. The name hit the square like a stone dropped into a silent lake. He was not just rich. He was the richest private man in the country. He owned banks and hospitals and 3 of the biggest companies anyone in this village had ever heard of on the radio. And he was standing in Humira, in the dust, for a teacher nobody had believed. He turned and looked at Ada directly. "This woman saved my life," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And you stood here to punish her for it." He paused. "Pack nothing. You are coming with me." Ada stared at him. "I have 42 children who need a teacher tomorrow morning." Daniel looked at her for a moment. "We will arrange your replacement," he said simply. "Please." It was the please that surprised her most. The house was not a house. It was a world. Ada had read about places like this in the novels she borrowed from the regional library. High white walls and long corridors and floors that reflected your face back at you like still water. Paintings that cost more than her entire village. A staircase that curved upward like a question mark waiting for an answer. A young woman named Grace was assigned to show Ada around. Grace wore a uniform that was pressed sharper than anything Ada owned, and she spoke in a voice that was polite in the way that could also mean cold. "Your room is here," Grace said, opening a door to a space larger than Ada's entire former home. "Meals are at 7, 1, and 7. The house rules will be explained tomorrow." Ada set her small bag, the only thing she had brought, on the wide white bed. She sat down beside it. She was here. Safe, according to Daniel's men. Fed according to the schedule. Protected, according to the locked gate and the uniformed guards outside. And yet, in the corridor outside her room, she could hear the quiet talk of house staff that stopped the moment she passed. She saw the way the older cook glanced at the young steward when Ada walked into the kitchen to ask for water. She noticed the small pauses, barely there but definitely there, when she asked a simple question. She was in the big house. But she was not welcome in it. That night, Ada lay in the softest bed she had ever touched and stared at the ceiling and felt more alone than she had ever felt on her thin mat in Humira. Was she truly safe here? The attacks did not come with raised voices or open accusations. That was not how things worked in a house like this. They came softly, the way a knife enters quietly before you feel the pain. On the second day, Ada's breakfast tray arrived with a cup of tea that tasted slightly wrong. She set it aside after one sip. Her stomach cramped that afternoon for 6 hours, and she told herself it was the stress of the new environment. On the 4th day, one of the senior staff told her that Daniel had left specific instructions that she was not to wander the east wing of the house. Ada said she understood. But later that evening she overheard 2 women saying that Daniel had given no such instruction. Someone had made that up. But who? On the 6th day, a woman came to visit. She swept into the house like she owned it, which, Ada would later understand, was exactly what she had once believed. Her name was Sandra, tall, polished, draped in jewelry that announced money. She was Daniel's former fiancée, and she looked at Ada the way a hawk looks at a lizard. "I heard about the village rescue," Sandra said, smiling with only her mouth. "How sweet. You must be very proud." Ada looked at her calmly. "I only did what was right." "Of course you did," Sandra replied, still smiling. I am sure that is all this is. That night, Ada became sick again, this time badly enough that Grace had to call the house nurse. Somebody in this house wanted Ada gone. But who wanted her dead? The strange thing was the dreams. Ada had never been a dreaming woman. She slept hard and woke clean, like a woman with a simple life and a simple mind. But now, in this big house with its soft beds and silent corridors, the dreams came every night like visitors who had been waiting a long time. In them she was small, younger than she ever remembered being. She was in a room she did not recognize, a room with red curtains and a smell of wood smoke. There was a boy. She could never see his face properly, only his outline, tall for his age, thin, crying. And in the dream, she was wiping his face. She was telling him something. She could never hear the words. She woke from one of these dreams to find Daniel standing in the doorway of her room. He knocked against the open door. You cried out, he said simply. Ada sat up. I am sorry. He stepped in and sat in the chair across from her bed, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Have we met before? Ada asked. Before the quarry, I mean. Daniel looked at the floor. A long pause filled the room. What do your dreams show you? He asked instead. Ada described the red curtains, the boy, the words she could never hear. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the window. You should eat more, he said finally, standing. You need your strength. He walked out. He had not answered her question. And that was an answer by itself. What was she forgetting? On the 12th day in the house, the missing money appeared. Ada walked into her room after breakfast to find Grace and 2 other members of the house staff waiting. Between them, on the white bedspread, were 3 bundles of cash, large denomination notes bound with rubber bands. These were found inside your bag, Grace said. Her voice was careful, professional, and utterly empty of surprise. That is not my money, Ada said. No one is accusing you, Grace replied, which was exactly what people say when they are accusing you. The house manager, a thin man named Mr. Amati, arrived within minutes. He asked questions in the flat tone of a man who had already made up his mind. He wrote things in a small notebook. He told Ada he would be reporting the matter to Mr. Daniel directly. Ada asked to be present when he did. That will not be necessary, Amati said. She was confined to her room for the rest of the day. She sat on the bed and thought carefully. She had brought almost nothing into this house. Her small bag held a change of clothing, her chalk box out of old habit, a photograph, and her savings, which was not enough to fill one of those bundles. Someone had planted that money. Someone who had access to her room. Someone who moved easily through this house and was trusted enough not to be questioned. She thought about Grace. She thought about Sandra. She thought about the quiet, watching eyes she had noticed from the very first day. Someone close to her had done this. But which face was hiding the knife? The next morning, Ada was asked to leave. Mr. Amati delivered the message with his notebook under his arm and his face arranged into something that was not quite sorry. He said the situation had become complicated. He said the house had a reputation to protect. He said her things were already packed and a car was waiting. Ada dressed quietly. She picked up her small bag. She walked through the long corridor one last time, looking at the paintings and the polished floors and the high white ceilings. At the top of the staircase, she looked down. Daniel was standing at the bottom. He was dressed for the day, jacket on, phone in hand, the look of a man with places to be. He looked up and saw her. Their eyes held for a moment, just a moment, and something passed between them that Ada could not name. Then he looked down at his phone. He said nothing. Ada walked down the stairs. She passed 2 feet from him. She could smell his cologne. She could see the tension in his jaw, the tight hold of a man working very hard to stay still. She walked out of the front door. The morning sun hit her face. The car took her to a guest lodge in the nearby town. Paid for, she was told, for 2 weeks. After that, she was on her own. She sat in the small lodge room and breathed slowly. She was not broken. She told herself this firmly. But she did not understand why the most powerful man in the country had looked at her and said absolutely nothing. The answers, when they began to come, arrived from an unexpected direction. On her third day in the lodge, a small woman knocked on her door. She introduced herself as Dr. Yatund, a neurologist from Lagos, she said, who had been sent by a mutual friend. She had a quiet way about her, and eyes that had seen difficult things and made peace with them. Ada almost turned her away. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the dreams, which had gotten worse. Maybe it was the growing certainty that something had been stolen from her, not money or property, but something older and deeper. Dr. Yatund asked her questions, showed her photographs. Some of them Ada looked at without feeling, like looking at a wall. Others caused a sharp, inexplicable ache behind her eyes, places she did not remember visiting, faces she did not remember seeing. Then the doctor showed her an image of a red-curtained room. Ada's hand flew to her mouth. Over 2 hours, piece by piece, Dr. Yatund explained it. 17 years ago, Ada had suffered a medically induced trauma, a procedure designed to remove specific memories. She had been, at the time, the only witness to an event that certain people could not afford to have remembered. She had known Daniel Okafor since he was 11 years old. She had saved him the first time before the quarry. Long before. And somebody powerful enough to reach a doctor and pay the price, had made sure she forgot. Who had reached into her mind and taken her past. The name, when Daniel finally spoke it, landed like a stone through glass. He came to the lodge himself on the 5th day, alone, no convoy. He sat across from Ada at the small wooden table by the window and told her everything he should have told her. From the first moment he saw her in the village square. The name was Victor Okafor, Daniel's older brother. 20 years ago, their father, a man of quiet power and tremendous wealth, had made a decision about his estate. The inheritance would not go to the firstborn. It would go to the son he believed had the truer heart. That son was Daniel. Victor had known this. And Victor had spent 2 decades building a plan to change it. The plan required removing every person who knew the truth of what their father had written and why. Ada's late mother had worked closely with the father. Ada, as a young girl, had been present during a meeting that Victor could not afford to have witnessed. And so Victor had hired men, doctors, fixers, to quietly erase the memory of a small, unimportant girl from a village who nobody would ever think to ask about. It had worked. For 17 years, it had worked perfectly. Until a set of criminals Victor hired to deal with Daniel beat him too hard and left him in the wrong quarry ditch. Until Ada knelt beside him in the dark. Victor had been watching from the beginning. The whispers in Yumura. The planted money. The poison tea. Every move designed to remove Ada before she remembered too much. He needed her out of the picture before the truth surfaced. But why did the truth matter so much now? Because the father's will had a condition. Daniel explained it to Ada in a flat, careful voice, the voice of a man who had been carrying this for a long time and was tired of the weight. The estate, the banks, the companies, the land, everything, could only be transferred once 2 people signed for it. Daniel was the first. The second, by the specific language their father had written, was the witness who had been present at the original meeting. The one person who could verify, under oath, that the instructions were spoken freely and clearly. That witness was Ada. She was not just someone who had wandered into his life. She was, by his father's design, the key. Victor had known this since the will was first read 3 months ago, when the lawyers finally unsealed it after the required 20-year waiting period. He had immediately begun searching for the witness. And when he found Ada, living quietly in Yumura, teaching children, remembering nothing, he had started his campaign to destroy her reputation before her memory returned. And when Daniel's enemies left him dying in that quarry ditch, Victor had not sent help. He had waited. He expected Ada to be too frightened to act. He expected Daniel to bleed out in the dark. He had miscalculated both of them. But now that they knew, Victor would not miscalculate again. Ada was no longer an inconvenience to be removed quietly. She was a threat to be eliminated completely. By the time Daniel finished speaking, there were 3 black cars parked outside the lodge. They did not belong to Daniel. The window shattered first. Ada dropped below the table as Daniel was already moving, pulling her arm, pulling her low, moving toward the back of the room in the crouching run of a man who had trained for this. The door behind them held for 6 seconds. Then it broke open. 2 men. Masks. Moving fast. Daniel had one of his own men positioned at the back exit. Ada had not noticed him, but he was there, and he moved now, creating enough chaos for them to get out through the small back passage and into the narrow alley behind the lodge. They ran. 3 streets. A turn. Another turn. Then a rusted blue gate that opened from the inside when Daniel knocked on it twice in a specific way. Inside was a safe house, a small, clean room with 2 chairs, a table, a radio, and a man named Joseph who had clearly been waiting. Ada sat down. Her hands were shaking for the first time in this entire ordeal. She pressed them flat on her thighs and breathed until they stopped. Daniel sat across from her. He looked at her for a long moment. "I kept my distance in the house," he said quietly. "And I said nothing when you were sent away. Because Victor's people were watching everything. Every word I said to you, every gesture, they were measuring it. I was trying to keep you outside the circle of what they considered a real threat." He paused. "I was protecting you the only way I could. It was wrong of me. I should have explained." Ada looked at him. "How important am I really to all of this?" His eyes did not move from hers. "Without you," he said, "none of it holds. Everything." Joseph spread papers on the small table, legal documents, land surveys, letters written in their father's handwriting, a sealed envelope with Ada's name on it that had been locked in a bank vault for 20 years. Ada opened it with fingers that barely trembled. Inside was a letter. 2 pages, handwritten in ink that had faded to a deep brown. She read it twice, slowly. Their father had known her mother. He had trusted her mother the way you trust someone who has proven themselves over years and hard times. When he sat down to plan the future of everything he had built, he had asked for Ada's mother as his witness. Ada's mother, already sick by then, had brought her young daughter along because there was nobody to leave her with. A girl of 7. Quiet. Large-eyed. Sitting in the corner of a room with red curtains while adults spoke about important things. Their father had seen her. He had looked at her and said to Ada's mother, "That child has the eyes of someone who does not forget." He had amended his will that same day to include the child as a secondary witness, with her testimony to be taken when she came of age. He had not known about Victor's capacity for cruelty. He had not imagined a world where someone would reach into a child's mind and steal her memories. But he had, as if by instinct, left one last protection. In the sealed envelope, along with the letter, was a copy of everything. Physical proof. His handwriting, his signature, the date. Victor needed Ada alive to stop her from testifying. The moment she testified, he needed her gone. The clock was running. Trust is the door that the wrong people always find first. It was Joseph who did it. Ada saw it in the timing, the moment she replayed the sequence in her head later. Joseph had been in the room when Daniel explained everything. Joseph had been there when the envelope was opened. And Joseph had excused himself shortly after, saying he needed to check the perimeter. He came back with 6 men. They were not Daniel's. Daniel moved immediately. He always moved immediately. Ada had learned this about him. But there were too many and the room was too small. They took Daniel's phone. They restrained his one guard. And they stood Daniel against the wall with hands that communicated very clearly what they were capable of. Then the man in charge turned to Ada. "The documents," he said. Ada looked at him. She looked at Daniel. Daniel's face was stone, but his eyes were telling her something. "Be calm," they said. Do not panic. Give him what he wants, Daniel said quietly. Ada handed over the envelope. The man checked its contents, nodded, and then made a phone call. He spoke 2 sentences. Then he ended the call and looked at Ada with the flat expression of a man following instructions he did not write. She comes with us, he said. Daniel moved. It took 3 of them to hold him. Ada was walked out of the safe house and into a waiting vehicle. Through the tinted window, she could see Daniel shouting something she could not hear. The car moved. She had trusted a room. And the room had been listening. They took her to a building on the edge of the city, an old processing facility that smelled of rust and time. They put her in a room with 1 light and 1 chair and a door that locked from the outside. She sat. She breathed. She did not fall apart. This was important. This was the thing about Ada that the people who underestimated her kept getting wrong. She did not fall apart. She bent sometimes. She ached. But she did not break. She began to think. She thought about the envelope. The original was gone. But she was a teacher. Teachers memorize things because chalk runs out and paper is expensive. She had read that letter twice, slowly. She had looked at the documents carefully. Land numbers, dates, signatures. She remembered all of it. She was the document. She had always been the document. Now she turned her attention to the room. 1 light. 1 chair. The door locked from outside but hinged from inside. She could see the hinges. The window had iron bars, but the concrete around the lower left bar was old and crumbling at the base. She spent 4 hours on that bar. She did not hurry. She worked steadily, the way she worked every other difficult thing. Patiently, completely, without drama. When the bar came loose, she held it in both hands and felt the weight of it. She was not a violent woman. She never had been. But she was a woman with a bar in her hand and a reason to walk out of this room. And she would walk out. Daniel found her 2 streets from the facility, walking barefoot because she had left her shoes behind to move quietly. He stopped the car himself and got out before it finished rolling. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not relief exactly. Something bigger than relief, something that did not have a clean name. He said nothing. He simply stood in front of her and looked, the way you look at something you thought was gone. I am all right, Ada said, because she was. They drove. Daniel made calls. His people, the real ones, the ones Victor had not reached, had been moving since the moment she was taken. Victor's compound was already surrounded by federal authorities. The original envelope was gone, yes. But Joseph, it turned out, was not as loyal to Victor as Victor believed. He had made a copy before handing it over. People always underestimate the man in the corner who watches everything and says little. In the car, Daniel told her the last piece, the part he had held back even in the safe house. Their father had known Ada's mother was sick. He had known that Ada might one day have nothing and no one. And so he had placed, in trust, an arrangement. Not an inheritance exactly, but a provision. A share of something. To be released to her when the will was executed. My father saw you, Daniel said simply. Even as a child, he saw you. Ada looked out the window at the city passing by. She thought about 7 years old, sitting quietly in a red-curtained room, watching adults speak. She had thought she was invisible. She had never been invisible. Victor Okafor was arrested on a Tuesday morning. The same day of the week that the villagers of Yumra had dragged Ada into the square. Ada found this detail meaningful. The world, she had come to believe, had a sense of timing. The tribunal was not dramatic the way courtrooms are in stories. It was quiet and procedural and smelled of old paper and air conditioning. Ada sat in a chair and answered questions in her clear, unhurried voice. She recalled dates. She described rooms. She recited, word for word, passages from the letter she had memorized because she had understood, somewhere in her body, that she might need to. Victor sat across the room with his lawyers and his expensive suit, and his face arranged into the expression of a man who believed right up until the last moment that he would find a way out. He did not find one. When it was finished, when the gavel came down and the room began to empty, Victor looked at Ada across the aisle. His eyes were hard and unreadable, and then, for just a moment, something cracked behind them. Ada held his gaze. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. No fire. No sweetness of revenge. She felt something quieter, the feeling of a thing being finally, completely put to rest. Outside the courthouse, Daniel was waiting. Beside him were his lawyers and his people and a man from the financial board holding documents for Ada to sign. She had the power now. Over the assets. Over the future of two enormous companies. Over the fate of families who worked under the Okafor name. She looked at Daniel. "What do I do with it?" she asked. He looked back at her. "That," he said, "is entirely up to you." Ada chose a Thursday to go back to Humira. Thursdays had always felt like the right kind of day to her, not the beginning of things, not the end, but the steady middle where real work gets done. She did not go back with black cars or suited men or the kind of noise that makes people run to their windows. She went in a plain vehicle, alone except for a driver, wearing her good dress. Not the torn one, but the second one, the one she had saved for special occasions. The village looked the same. Dusty roads. Mango trees along the square. Children chasing a flat football across the open ground. But the faces she passed were different. Word had reached Humira long before she did, and the word had done its work. She could see it in the way people slowed when they saw her. The way hands came up to cover mouths. The way Chief Bellow's curtain moved and then went very still. She did not stop for any of it. She walked to the school. Her 42 children, now 45, someone had been busy, were sitting on the floor when she appeared in the doorway. The substitute teacher stepped aside without being asked. Ada stood at the front of the class. She looked at the small faces looking up at her. She picked up a piece of chalk. "We left off at chapter 7, she said. A boy in the front row raised his hand. "Teacher, are you back? For real?" Ada looked at him for a moment. She thought about everything that had happened, the quarry, the house, the safe room, the tribunal, the signing of papers that made her, on paper, a woman of significant means. She thought about her mother, who had brought her to a meeting she was too young to understand, in a room with red curtains, and changed the course of everything without knowing it. She smiled at the boy. "Yes," she said simply. "I am back." She turned and wrote on the board. One word. Courage. And the lesson began. The girl they called Nothing became the one they could never replace.